Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
Harmony Glades. A place for everything and everything in its place. Agnes Miller clipped a withered bloom from a rosebush, her movements precise, almost surgical. Each cut was a deliberate assertion of control in a world that felt increasingly capricious. The knockout roses, flaunting their scarlet hues, were her darlings, cultivated to perfection within Harmony Glades' HOA regulations. The approved variety, spacing just so, a 3-inch blanket of cedar mulch, and never, ever a stray tendril beyond the designated parameters. Harold, her late husband, used to playfully chide her about her rigid adherence to the rules, but without him, they were her anchor, a steadying framework in the turbulent sea of grief. She surveyed her work, head cocked at a single audacious petunia. A pop of purple, peeked from beneath a salviette. Agnes's brow furrowed at a blatant infraction. She plucked it free, its fragile roots yielding easily, and dropped it into her trug. Harmony Glades prized order above all else. That was its allure, its essence, its home. The grinding gears of a moving truck shattered the morning stillness. Agnes peered over the immaculate hedge bordering her property and the long vacant lot beside it. Finally, someone was taking up residence in that eyesore of a house. She straightened, smoothing her floral dress, her heart aflutter. New arrivals, that meant introductions, gentle reminders of the community bylaws, and an unspoken expectation to uphold established norms. The truck was emptied with impressive speed. Young men, all brawn and briskness, ferried cartons into the house. Agnes observed, a tremor of disquiet tickling her spine. They were not the typical denizens of Harmony Glades. Then she saw it. A riotous rainbow flag, snapping in the gentle breeze. It was being hoisted onto the flagpole on the front porch. Agnes gasped. The display was so brazen, so unnecessary. Her grip on the gardening shears tightened, knuckles bone white. The flag seemed a taunt against the tranquil order she had carefully constructed. It was a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious melody of Harmony Glades. Bob Johnson, the HOA president, ambled by on his routine morning constitutional. A decent man, Bob, though somewhat malleable. Agnes flagged him down with a swift wave. "Bob, good day." He peered at her over his spectacles, his face mapped with the permanent worry lines of a conflict-averse individual. "Agnes, the roses are stunning per usual. Did you catch sight of that?" She inclined her shears towards the flag. Bob followed her pointer, his expression clouding. He adjusted his glasses, a telltale sign of unease. "Yes, I did. The new occupant, I gather? It's unseemly. Wouldn't you agree, Bob? We have standards to maintain. A reputation precedes us." Agnes's voice gained altitude. "What will the Millers think? Or the Chengs, with their impressionable children?" Bob wrung his hands, his anxiety palpable. "Now, Agnes, let's not rush to conclusions. It's possible. It could simply be a decorative banner. A vividly colored piece." Agnes snorted. "A vividly colored piece. Don't be obtuse, Bob. That's a pride flag. It's political." She dropped her voice to a stage whisper. "And quite frankly, an affront to the EYT clashes with the overall aesthetic. We cannot permit residents to simply erect whatever they please." Bob swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I'm uncertain, Agnes, that we've not encountered this scenario previously. I will need to consult the regulations. I'm unsure whether flag displays are explicitly addressed." "Well, they ought to be, and action must be taken, Bob. This transcends mere flags. It's about preserving our standards. It's about safeguarding the values that define Harmony Glades." Righteousness surged through her. People choose to reside here for a reason. They crave serenity and structure. At that moment, the front door swung open and a man emerged onto the porch. He was tall, his features alight with a warm smile and eyes creased with merriment. Dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, he cradled a steaming mug. He met their gaze directly, his expression steady. "Good morning," he called, his voice carrying over the groomed lawns. "I'm David Rodriguez, the new neighbor, and you are?" Agnes recoiled slightly, caught off guard by his directness. Bob stammered, "I'm Bob Johnson, HOA president, and this is Agnes Miller. Welcome to Harmony Glades. David's smile held firm, though Agnes thought she glimpsed a flicker of something else, amusement, perhaps. Thank you, Bob. Agnes, I anticipate getting to know you all. I trust my decorations aren't causing any consternation. He glanced pointedly at the pride flag, its colors bold against the cerulean canvas. Agnes tightened her lips. We simply wish to ensure adherence to community guidelines, Mr. Rodriguez. Of course, David responded evenly. Wouldn't want to upset the equilibrium. He sipped his coffee, his gaze lingering on Agnes. Harmony Glades seems a rather idyllic spot, the place for everything, and everything in its place, as the saying goes. His words, though ostensibly amiable, felt like a gauntlet. Agnes returned his stare, her grip on her shears unyielding. The opening skirmish, she understood, had begun. A clash of values. Agnes Miller observed him clipping at his rose bushes, the late sun gilding strands of his hair. David Rodriguez, the newcomer, and already a discordant note in Harmony Glades. She tightened her grip on her gardening shears, the chilled steel a small solace against her rising agitation. The flag at IT simply had to come down. Mr. Rodriguez, she called, pitching her voice just so, a concerned inquiry rather than an outright accusation. Welcome. I'm Agnes Miller, from number 7. David straightened, loppers dangling. A smile bloomed across his face, open and guileless in a way Agnes found unsettling. David, please, and a pleasure. Agnes, perhaps you can advise me on these roses? I'm still finding my way. Agnes returned a facsimile of a smile. Actually, it's regarding something else. Community matters. She gestured with the shears toward the rainbow banner rippling from his porch. The wind caught it. A bright, unapologetic statement. David's smile didn't waver, though Agnes sensed a new reserve in his gaze. The flag? Is there an issue? Well, Agnes began, choosing each word with surgical precision. Harmony Glades does maintain certain expectations. Curb appeal. You understand, to ensure our property values remain robust. The unspoken threat hung heavy, a cloying sweetness like artificial air freshener. I appreciate the importance of property values, David replied smoothly. I'm invested here, after all. He resumed tending the rose bush, snipping off a withered bloom with a practiced motion. Agnes persisted. The HOA has guidelines, of course, concerning ornamentation. Specific displays, they can be jarring. She paused, waiting for the penny to drop. That IT didn't. Jarring how? David asked, his tone even. Agnes stiffened her spine. It's untraditional. It clashes with the established character of Harmony Glades. And, frankly, some residents have voiced discomfort. She named no names, needing to name none. The implication resonated, unanimous disapproval. David finally paused. He met Agnes's gaze directly, his expression hardening. That flag is about pride, Agnes, pride in myself. Pride in the LGBTQ+ community. IT symbolizes acceptance and inclusion, and it's staying put. Agnes's lips thinned. The HOA regulations are quite explicit regarding external adornments. I wouldn't want you to incur a violation. I've reviewed those regulations, David said, his voice now firm yet courteous. And I believe my flag adheres to them. He paused, adding a cool edge to his tone. If the HOA disagrees, they're welcome to contact my attorney. Agnes spluttered. An attorney? Really, Mr. Rodriguez, this is hardly grounds for legal action. It is when my rights are at stake, David countered, indicating the flag. It's not simply a decoration, Agnes. It's an affirmation, and I have the right to make it. Brenda Chan, tending her petunias 2 houses down, had been surreptitiously following the exchange. Agnes radiated tension. An almost visible force field. Brenda's heart hammered. She recognized the script, the subtle barbs, the coded accusations, the HOA weaponized. She longed to vanish into the flowerbed, feigning deafness, but David, standing tall with quiet conviction, sparked something within her. Agnes, unaware of Brenda's silent witness, pressed her offensive. I'm merely suggesting you consider the impact your choice. is having on the community fabric. I have considered it, Agnes, David stated, his voice resolute. And I believe the positive impact far outweighs any perceived unease. He turned back to his roses, a clear dismissal. Agnes stood frozen for a beat, her face burning with indignation. Then, with a clipped nod, she pivoted and stalked back to her flawlessly ordered lawn. The snip of her shears a brittle counterpoint to the approaching twilight. Brenda watched her retreat, then darted a glance toward David, now humming to himself as he pruned. She yearned to speak, to offer solidarity, but the words felt trapped. She was caught, as always, between her desire for tranquility in Harmony Glades and the creeping certainty that something here was fundamentally amiss. She yanked another weed, the roots tearing free, but the disquiet in her gut remained. This, she realized with a shiver, was merely the opening salvo. Battle lines were drawn, and she stood squarely on the fault line. Under cover of darkness, Agnes Miller stood at her kitchen window, the floral curtains doing little to soften the harsh glare of the security light next door. David's rainbow flag rippled in the artificial wind, a defiant splash of color against the muted greens and browns of the suburban landscape. It mocked her. Sleep had evaded her for days. Each time she closed her eyes, all she saw was that flag, a symbol of, well, of everything that was wrong with the world. She told herself it wasn't hate, and oh, it was about decency, about upholding the values this community was built upon. Values that were eroding, she feared, one rainbow stripe at a time. A battle raged within her. The Agnes who volunteered at the church bake sale, the Agnes who sent get-well cards to neighbors with the flu, recoiled at the thought of doing something dishonest. But the other Agnes, the one who felt a fierce protectiveness over her grandchildren and an unshakable belief in her own moral compass, argued that some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant bending the rules. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. 2:17 a.m. Everyone would be asleep. The thought sent a shiver of something akin to excitement down her spine. It was now or never. She pulled on her oldest gardening clothes, a shapeless olive green jacket and a pair of well-worn boots. She grabbed a pair of heavy-duty pruning shears from the garage, their metal blades glinting ominously in the dim light. Her hands trembled, but she pressed on, driven by a potent cocktail of righteous indignation and simmering resentment. Outside, the air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and something else, something vaguely metallic. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around her as she crept along the edge of her property. She reached the property line and hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. There was still time to turn back, to pretend she hadn't considered this insane act, but the sight of the flag, still waving its brightly colored challenge, hardened her resolve. Agnes slipped through the gap in the hedge and onto David's property. The grass was wet beneath her feet, and she felt a pang of guilt as she trampled over his carefully manicured lawn. She told herself he deserved it. He had brought this on himself. As she approached the flagpole, she heard a sound, a soft rustling from across the street. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Had someone seen her? She peered into the darkness, trying to make out any movement. Across the street, behind the drawn curtains of the Sanchez house, Maria Sanchez watched. She had been unable to sleep, the hum of anxiety a constant companion these days from her bedroom window. She saw Agnes Miller, a dark figure lurking in David's yard. Maria recognized the olive green jacket. The way Agnes hunched her shoulders, she saw Agnes reach the flagpole, raise the shears, and with a vicious snip, sever the rope holding the flag aloft. The rainbow banner crumpled to the ground, a heap of vibrant colors swallowed by the darkness. Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She wanted to shout, to run outside and stop Agnes, but fear paralyzed her. Fear of Agnes, fear of the repercussions, fear of drawing attention to herself and her family. Instead, she watched helplessly as Agnes, her face obscured by shadows, gathered the fallen flag and stuffed it into a large garbage bag she'd been carrying. Then, she hurried back, across the lawn, disappearing into the darkness of her own yard. Maria sank back against the headboard, her heart pounding. She wanted to call David, to warn him, but she was too afraid. She knew what Agnes was capable of. She had seen the way Agnes looked at her children, the thinly veiled disdain in her eyes. Down the street, Agnes Miller stood in her garage, the garbage bag containing the mangled flag heavy in her hands. She felt a strange sense of triumph, a fleeting moment of satisfaction. But as she looked at the bag, a wave of nausea washed over her. What had she done? She slammed the garage door shut, plunging herself into darkness. The image of the flag, tattered and torn, was burned into her mind. Sleep, she knew, would be even harder to come by tonight. Evidence and escalation. The sharp crack of the flagpole against the siding jolted David awake. More than any alarm that it wasn't the sight of the leaning pole that registered first, but that distinct report, like splintering wood. He'd been scrambling to make a conference call, his coffee threatening to spill over the lip of his travel mug. The sound, though, froze him mid-stride. Carefully, he placed the mug on the porch railing, the soft chime of ceramic against the iron a stark contrast to the earlier violence, and moved into the yard. There, on the dewy lawn, lay the flag. It wasn't simply askew. It had been brutalized, torn as if by a vicious animal, its bright hues smeared with grime. A wave of sick anger, more potent than he anticipated, clenched his gut. This wasn't mere fabric. It represented something, a belief, an extension of himself, and someone had deliberately desecrated it. The morning devolved into a slow burn of indignation. His conference call became a muddled mess of incomplete thoughts and strained pleasantries. The violation felt deeply personal, a pointed affront. He tried to dismiss it, youthful delinquency, a senseless act, but the precise tear by the grommets, the raw savagery of the gashes. It spoke of intention. By lunchtime, a security camera, expedited from Amazon, was his priority. He nestled it among the rambling roses on the porch, its lens trained on the flagpole and a generous view of the street. An app pinged his phone whenever motion was detected. Paranoid, perhaps, but vulnerability would not be. Repeated. The following morning, the recorded events played out. The usual delivery trucks, Mrs. Henderson's dog walker, a squirrel's acrobatic performance on the grass. Then, at 2:17 a.m., a form materialized from the darkness. The image wasn't crystal clear, but recognition was unavoidable. Agnes Miller. His breath stalled. Agnes? He replayed the scene, a knot tightening in his stomach with each passing second. She moved with a furtive haste, darting glances around before reaching for the flag. As she wrestled with the fasteners, the camera captured her expression, a blend of focused effort and a shadowed emotion. Remorse. Once the flag was detached, she didn't fold it, didn't try to conceal it. Instead, she attacked it with a raw fury that stunned him. Then, just as quickly, she vanished into the night. A complex tangle of feelings constricted him. Disbelief warred with rage, but also a peculiar sense of deflation. He'd imagined a nameless assailant, a random surge of animosity. Not Agnes, the kindly woman who delivered Christmas cookies every year. He spent the afternoon circling his living room, the damning footage looping endlessly in his head. He knew what he had to do. First, notify law enforcement. The responding officer, young and carefully impassive, listened to David's account and watched the video. The officer's pen scratched across the notepad. Vandalism, property damage, he stated neutrally. We'll investigate, Mr. Rodriguez. David suspected the case would gather dust, but at least a record existed. Next, a call to his legal counsel. Maria listened with unwavering focus as he narrated the incident, her silence punctuated only by soft murmurs of acknowledgement. This transcends simple property desecration, David, she declared when he concluded. This is about intimidation. This has the stench of hate. I realize that, he replied, his voice taut. What options do I have? We can pursue a civil suit, claiming damages for the emotional distress and the physical damage. We can also explore the possibility of hate crime charges, though that decision rests with the DA. And, she added, a subtle edge entering her tone, we can dissect the HOA bylaws, see if we can find any leverage there. The final sentence hung pregnant with implication that he knew what Maria suggested. He'd been hesitant to escalate, reticent to provoke further. But Agnes's actions had crossed a threshold. That it wasn't solely about a flag any longer. That it had become a matter of principle. Let's pursue everything, Maria, he affirmed, his voice hardening. Let's see what we unearth. Cease and desist. The cream envelope, weighty in her hand, seemed to pulse with ill tidings. Agnes Miller's gaze narrowed on the starkly printed return address. Rodriguez and Klein, attorneys at law. A world apart from the graceful calligraphy of her usual correspondence. A chill, viscous dread settled in her gut. She ripped the envelope open, a tad too aggressively, causing a slight tear in the high-quality paper within. A blizzard of legal pronouncements accused her of transgressions. Trespassing, property, defacement, rights violations. The letter meticulously chronicled the prior week's events, citing the calculated destruction of a rainbow banner, as if it were a national treasure. The final paragraph, a hammer blow, demanded an immediate cessation of all harassing and intimidating activities, with the ominous promise of escalated legal measures should she defy. A wave of outrage, hot and fierce, surged through Agnes, momentarily stealing her breath. Harassment? Intimidation? The gall. David Rodriguez, with his ostentation, was the one assaulting the sensibilities of the neighborhood with his lifestyle. The letter crumpled in her grip, the fine paper protesting under the force of her emotions. It felt like a deliberate insult, dressed up in legal finery. Her initial fury began to coalesce into a cold, strategic anger. This had to be stopped, decisively. David Rodriguez wouldn't be permitted to redefine the values of their community. He clearly believed he could strong-arm them into acquiescence with his expensive lawyers and his garish flag. She smoothed the wrinkled missive, the creases now permanent badges of her initial disquiet. First, Bob Johnson, HOA president, and a man who prized tranquility above all else. This legal escalation would undoubtedly send him into a tailspin. She located Bob amidst his prize-winning rose bushes, snipping away spent blossoms with meticulous care. "Bob, dear," she purred, approaching with a practiced, persuasive smile. "I'm afraid I have something rather distressing to discuss." Bob straightened, a furrow appearing on his brow. "Agnes? What is it?" "I was just about to administer the—" "It concerns David Rodriguez," she interjected, carefully pitching her voice to convey profound unease. "He sent me a positively menacing letter, accusing me of the most outlandish things." She brandished the cease and desist, ensuring the imposing law firm's letterhead was prominently displayed. Bob accepted the document gingerly, his complexion losing some of its color as he absorbed the legal jargon. "Goodness gracious, Agnes. What on earth is happening?" "He's attempting to bully me, Bob. Simply because I voiced my reservations regarding his decorations." She deliberately omitted mention of the rainbow flag, allowing Bob's own discomfort to paint the picture. "He seems to think he can waltz in here and flaunt things, and that we're all obliged to simply accept it. And now this, a legal threat." Bob wrung his hands, his usual amiable nature replaced by palpable agitation. "This is dreadful, Agnes. Truly dreadful that we can't have this sort of disharmony in the area." "Precisely. My sentiments exactly. That we must take action. Bob, we must demonstrate that we will not be intimidated, that we have established boundaries here." She lowered her voice, leaning in conspiratorially. "I was contemplating calling a gathering. To deliberate on this situation. To ensure everyone is on the same page." Bob's Adam's apple visibly strained. "A meeting? Agnes, are you certain that's prudent? Couldn't we perhaps engage in dialogue with him? Seek mediation?" Agnes gave a small, dismissive scoff that sliced through the peaceful air of the garden. "Mediate? After this blatant provocation? He has drawn a line in the sand. Bob. We must retaliate, for the good of the entire neighborhood." Bob hesitated, clearly conflicted between his yearning for serenity and his apprehension of Agnes's displeasure. Agnes seized her opportunity. "Consider the children, Bob. The example we set if we permit him to carry on unchecked. The children. The trump card. Bob's expression hardened subtly. "Very well, Agnes. Very well. I shall assist you in organizing the assembly. But let's endeavor to maintain a cordial atmosphere, shall we?" Agnes's face lit up, her smile a sharp, triumphant blade. "Naturally, Bob. Cordial. But steadfast." She ran through her roster of supporters in her mind, already plotting her strategy. David Rodriguez might be under the illusion he held the upper hand through legal means, but Agnes Miller possessed something far more potent: the unwavering backing of a community resolved to preserve its traditions. And she knew precisely how to harness that power. The HOA under fire. The staccato beat of David's typing broke the library's hush. On his screen, HOA regulations glowed an angry yellow, each highlighted clause a brick in the wall of his brewing fury. He transferred the pertinent sections into his complaint, his fingers a blur as he recounted the escalating conflict ignited by Agnes Miller's thinly veiled barbs and culminating in her cease and desist order concerning his rainbow flag. Every instance of her harassment, each pointed comment about community standards and proper decorum, found its place in the document. He added photographs. The flag, a vibrant declaration against the backdrop of his meticulously kept lawn, a splash of joyous color against the muted palette of conformity. With a decisive click, he submitted the digital salvo. 3 days later, the HOA assembled in the Johnsons' airless living room. Bob Johnson, perpetually damp, tugged at his collar. "All right, let's tackle this Rodriguez business. First up, the complaint." He flipped through the pages with palpable reluctance. All this fuss over a bit of fabric seems a tad exaggerated. Agnes Miller, perched rigidly on a floral settee, huffed. "Exaggerated? He's offending the sensibilities of us all. It's an abomination, pure and simple." Her tone dripped with honeyed contempt. She had chosen her attire with care, the floral print a deceptively gentle facade. Brenda Chen, usually reticent, shifted in her chair. "Perhaps we should hear him out, Bob. Understand his perspective." Bob waved a dismissive hand. "I'm sure it's a simple misunderstanding. Rules are rules. Everyone must adhere." He scanned the complaint, a slight frown creasing his brow. "He's invoking fair housing laws." David's accusation went beyond a mere gripe about a flag. It was a meticulously crafted legal argument. He had carefully dissected how several articles within the HOA's guiding document, those addressing moral conduct, community aesthetics, and conduct unbecoming, were easily twisted into discriminatory instruments, targeting LGBTQ+ members and other minorities. Brenda pressed forward. "Bob, consider this: that he's arguing that our guidelines are amorphous and invite biased application, potentially leading to targeted oppression. He is explicitly claiming discrimination." Color drained from Bob's face. "Discrimination? That's a heavy accusation." He shuffled the papers, his gaze skittering around the room. "Surely we are not prejudiced." Agnes scoffed. "Balderdash. We're safeguarding our investments." "But he has a valid point, Agnes," Brenda insisted, her voice gaining timbre. "Observe this segment concerning preserving the neighborhood's ambience. What does that truly signify? It's far too imprecise." Bob massaged his receding hairline. "He's threatening litigation. Isn't he a lawyer, this Rodriguez?" "Affirmative," Brenda said. "And a formidable one, from what I gather. Specializes in civil rights." This could escalate, Bob, significantly. Agnes, however, remained unyielding. "We employ our own counsel, do we not? We'll unleash him upon this Rodriguez fellow. He'll crumble." She crossed her arms, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "Besides, I have a few ideas brewing. He won't know what's coming." Brenda sighed, recognizing the futility of reasoning with Agnes's deep-seated biases. She turned her attention back to Bob, her tone urgent. "Bob, we must address this seriously. Even if he's merely attempting to intimidate us, we have to ensure our legal standing is beyond reproach. Perhaps we ought to revisit some of these bylaws, sharpen their language, remove ambiguity." Bob chewed his inner cheek, torn. The specter of a lawsuit chilled him to the bone. Equally daunting was the prospect of alienating Agnes and the established residents. He shifted his focus from Agnes's frosty glare to Brenda's imploring eyes. Deep down, he knew Brenda's counsel was sound, yet confronting Agnes felt akin to scaling Everest. He cleared his throat. Very well. Let's solicit a second opinion from the HOA attorney. Just for prudence. And, Brenda, if you could perhaps sketch out some alternate phrasing for those bylaws? As a precautionary measure." Brenda nodded, a spark of optimism flickering in her eyes. A minor triumph, yet a victory nonetheless. The battle for Harmony Glade had only just commenced. Meanwhile, Agnes, oblivious to the legal maelstrom gathering, sharpened her talons, plotting her counterattack against the audacious newcomer who dared challenge her vision of suburban order. Showdown at Harmony Hall. The air in Harmony Hall was a palpable thing, thick with unspoken anxieties. Every seat groaned under a body, with a spillover of hushed, restless neighbors crowding the doorway. David, shoes gleaming under the harsh fluorescence, stood poised at the podium, awaiting Bob Johnson, the HOA president, to call the assembly to order. Bob, looking wan, rasped a greeting. Right then, let's commence. The matter at hand is the grievance lodged by Mr. Rodriguez concerning the alleged discriminatory underpinnings of our community bylaws. His gaze skittered around the room, avoiding contact as he wrestled with the microphone. Agnes Miller, perched on the front row like a watchful sentry, pounced immediately. Discriminatory? Nonsense. We have covenants for a reason, Mr. Johnson. They safeguard property values, maintain decorum. Her voice, charged with indignation, echoed across the hall. A small cadre of supporters around her nodded in vehement accord. David advanced, his composure a stark contrast to the simmering resentment. Mrs. Miller, with all due respect, some rules are designed to exclude, not protect. The ambiguous nature of the acceptable displays bylaw, for example, renders it a potential weapon that's been deployed against my pride flag, but could just as readily target a religious emblem, a political statement, or even an unconventional color on your facade. A low rumble of conversation spread through the room. Agnes snorted. Preposterous! No one is stopping anyone from painting their house. We simply object to ostentatious displays, degrading the neighborhood's character. Brenda Chun, seated a few rows back, raised a hand. Agnes, that is precisely David's contention. Ostentatious is subjective. What you deem unsightly, another might perceive as beautiful or significant. These bylaws demand revision to ensure clarity and prevent biased interpretations. The debate escalated, a rapid exchange of accusations and justifications. David observed, letting the tension dissipate before reclaiming the floor. For too long, he began, his voice carrying a quiet strength. This community has fostered a facade of uniformity. We've pretended at homogeneity, at shared experiences and freedoms, but that pretense is simply untenable. He paused, his gaze encompassing the assembled residents. These bylaws, in their current form, establish a hierarchy. They favor specific perspectives, particular lifestyles, while marginalizing others. The message is subtle but unmistakable. You are welcome, provided you conform, provided you maintain the status quo, provided you don't challenge our perceptions of normalcy. He noted Maria Sanchez near the rear, her expression pale and pinched. He was keenly aware of her attentiveness, recalling their conversation from just days before. I recognize the underlying anxieties, David conceded, softening his tone. The apprehension associated with change, the unease born of the unknown. But true community isn't forged through conformity. It flourishes through acceptance, understanding, and the celebration of our collective differences, not their suppression. He drew a steadying breath. I'm not soliciting agreement with my lifestyle, I'm requesting respect for my fundamental right to live it authentically, without fear of reprisal. I'm imploring you to revise these bylaws to cultivate an environment where every member of this community feels secure, valued, and affirmed. A prolonged silence descended. Then, a small, fragile voice shattered the stillness. He's right. Maria Sanchez stepped forward, her hands quivering ever so slightly. I witnessed the removal of David's flag. I know who took it down. Agnes gasped, taken aback. I didn't do anything. A nervous glance flicked around the room. I was afraid. She took a shaky breath. I've lived here for 2 decades. I've always felt out of step. As if I needed to conceal a part of myself to assimilate. Because of these rules, because of the established order. She inhaled deeply. David is right. The time for change is now. Bob Johnson, his face a study in discomfort, cleared his throat yet again. Well, this This is certainly unexpected. We'll need to, conduct a vote. He shuffled the agenda, plainly wishing for an escape. The vote promised to be contentious, but David recognized, witnessing the glistening tears in Maria's eyes, that the foundation had shifted, the illusion of harmony had crumbled, leaving fertile ground for the germination of hope. A change in the air. The community center air hung heavy with the ghosts of coffee past and the palpable weight of unvoiced grudges. Bob Johnson, perched precariously on his folding chair, tugged at his tie, a knot tightening with each passing moment. The bylaw revision proposal, a potential tempest, awaited its turn. David's written arguments had been sharp, almost fervent. Brenda Chan had fortified them with a fortress of facts. But Agnes Miller, Agnes was a force of nature, untamed and unpredictable. These bylaws, Agnes began, her voice amplified and edged with scorn, have been the bedrock of this community for decades. They are the guardians of order, propriety. She scanned the assembled board, her gaze a sweeping searchlight. A faint sheen of perspiration slicked Bob's brow. Diluting our standards, she declared, will only usher in disruptive elements. A ripple of unease pulsed through the room. Bob fidgeted, yearning for the meeting's end. For the solace of his quiet routine, Brenda Chan caught his eye, offering a subtle, encouraging inclination of her head. That he averted his gaze, feigning fascination with the worn floral design clinging to the tablecloth. David took his turn, his tone even but firm. Agnes, with all due respect, these bylaws are exclusionary. They represent thinly disguised attempts to marginalize individuals based on legally protected attributes. He indicated the stack of briefs before him. The phrases concerning unsightly displays and community harmony are ripe for abuse. We have evidence of this. Agnes snorted. Rubbish. It's about safeguarding property values. Property values are not bolstered by bias, Agnes, Brenda retorted, her tone incisive. The debate raged on, a verbal volley of legal nuances and veiled accusations. Bob felt increasingly adrift. He simply wished it were over. He stole glances at the other board members. Mrs. Henderson, the retired librarian, appeared contemplative. Amar Peterson, the avid golfer, was lost in the contemplation of ceiling tiles. And then there was Agnes, her complexion flushed, her fingers clenched white around the table's edge. Long last, the moment of reckoning arrived. All those in favor of adopting the bylaw revisions as presented, please signify by raising your hand. Bob announced, his voice a mere breath. He raised his own hand, an action immediately followed by a wave of regret. Agnes speared him with a venomous glare. Brenda offered a ghost of a smile. Mrs. Henderson, after a moment of hesitation, lifted her hand. Mr. Peterson, seemingly just now comprehending the situation, copied her. Agnes's features twisted. You can't be serious. Bob cleared his throat. That's 4 ayes, 3 nays. The revisions are approved. A stunned quiet descended. Agnes remained motionless, her mouth ajar. Her face paled, leaving her strangely vulnerable. Brenda stood. Thank you, Bob. This is a progressive step for our community. She bestowed upon David a small, triumphant grin. David concurred with a nod. Indeed, Agnes slammed her fist on the table, sending ripples through the water glasses. This is an outrage. You'll all rue this. You're demolishing the very foundation of this community. Bob winced, allergic to discord. He craved harmony. Agnes, Bob offered feebly, let's not escalate this. Escalate? She screeched. You've ceded control of the asylum to the lunatics. Clutching her purse, she stormed from the room, the door echoing her fury as it slammed shut. The remaining board members exchanged wary glances. Bob felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He had just crossed Agnes Miller. His life, he suspected, was about to take an unpredictable turn. He could almost hear the meticulous hum of the HOA's machinery sputtering and faltering, replaced by the discordant racket of something new and uncharted. The atmosphere, once heavy with unspoken rules and subdued compliance, now pulsed with a raw, anxious energy. A sea change had occurred, and Bob wasn't entirely certain he appreciated the scent on the air. A new harmony. Agnes stared at the cracked porcelain doll on her mantelpiece, its painted smile a mockery of her current mood. The beige walls of her living room, once a sanctuary of predictable order, now felt like they were closing in. The HOA meeting replayed in her mind. A torturous loop of Brenda's smug face, David's calm, unwavering gaze, and the crushing weight of the vote against her. Against everything she stood for. She'd spent the afternoon ripping out her prize-winning petunias, their vibrant hues, now offensive in their cheerfulness. Each yank was a small act of defiance, a futile attempt to reclaim some control. The earth clung to her gardening gloves, a gritty reminder of her failure. The phone rang, a shrill intrusion. She almost didn't answer, but the persistent ringing chipped away at her resolve. It was Mildred, her voice a thin, reedy whine. "Agnes, dear, are you all right? I heard, well, you know?" Agnes sighed. "Yes, Mildred, I know. Everyone knows. It's just, well, I always thought you were doing what was best for Harmony Glades. And wasn't I?" Agnes snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "Wasn't I protecting our way of life? Our standards?" Mildred stammered. "Of course, dear. But times are changing, Agnes. Maybe we need to change with them." The line went dead. Agnes slammed the receiver down. It changed. It was a virus, infecting everything she held dear. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, melancholic shadows across her lawn, Agnes found herself drawn to the community bulletin board. It was usually a source of irritation, cluttered with notices for yoga classes and neighborhood watch meetings. But tonight, a new poster caught her EYE.in bold. Rainbow-colored letters, it announced the establishment of the Harmony Glades LGBTQ+ Support Fund, spearheaded by David Rodriguez. Agnes's stomach churned. At a fund to encourage that kind of thing? Below the announcement, a smaller note detailed the fund's purpose: to provide resources and support for LGBTQ+ residents and their families, and to promote inclusivity and understanding within the community. The website address and donation information were listed. Agnes recoiled, but a strange curiosity held her captive. She found herself walking back to her house, her gaze lingering on the poster. Across town, David sat at his laptop, a weary but satisfied smile on his face. The support fund was up and running, donations already trickling in. He'd spent the day fielding calls and emails from well-wishers, both inside and outside Harmony Glades. The energy was palpable, a wave of positive momentum he hadn't anticipated. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Changing hearts and minds took time, and there would undoubtedly be resistance. But he was committed to creating a safe and welcoming space for everyone in Harmony Glades, a place where differences were celebrated, not condemned. Meanwhile, Brenda Chan and Sarah, the young architect who lived down the street, were huddled over a table laden with flyers and brochures in Brenda's sun-drenched kitchen. They were planning a community picnic, a Harmony in the Glades, event designed to celebrate diversity and foster understanding. "We need something that's fun and inclusive," Sarah said, tapping a pen against her chin. "Something that will get people talking to each other." Brenda nodded, her eyes gleaming. "A potluck. Everyone brings a dish that represents their heritage or family traditions. We can have music, games, maybe even a storytelling session." They worked late into the night, fueled by enthusiasm and a shared vision for a more inclusive Harmony Glades. Brenda had ordered rainbow flags and banners, ready to decorate the park with symbols of acceptance and pride. Back in her beige living room, Agnes flicked off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. She couldn't shake the image of the rainbow-colored poster from her mind. She felt a strange stirring, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Was it resentment? Fear? Or something else entirely, something akin to curiosity? The cracked porcelain doll on the mantelpiece seemed to stare back at her in the darkness, its painted smile still mocking, but now, perhaps, a little less judgmental. As Agnes drifted off to sleep, a single word echoed in her mind. Harmony. But what did it truly mean? And was it possible to find a new harmony, one that embraced the very things she had fought so hard to keep out?